Why did millions of people believe a father was justified after shooting a man on live television? In March of 1984, at Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport, Gary Plauché walked up to a handcuffed man in front of rolling news cameras and pulled the trigger. Everyone saw the shot, but what they didn't see was the crime that led to it. The details of that crime would shock the nation, and when Gary Plauché finally stood before a judge, that verdict would ignite a debate that still hasn't ended more than 40 years later. To understand why so many people thought Gary Plauché was justified, you have to go back months earlier. Before we do that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider clicking like and subscribe. And with that said, let's jump right in. Before the airport, before everything that made this case infamous, the Plauché family lived what looked like a normal life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Gary Plauché was a former U.S. Air Force sergeant turned salesman, raising his 11-year-old son, Jody. After Gary and his wife, June, separated, he enrolled Jody in karate, hoping it would give him confidence and help him through a difficult time. At that time, it probably felt like one of the best decisions Gary had made for Jody. Spoiler alert, it absolutely was not, because that instructor was a 25-year-old man named Jeffrey Doucet. Jeffrey was popular with both the kids and their parents, and before long, he was spending time at the Plauché home, taking a special interest in Jody's training and earning the family's trust. To Gary and June, he seemed like exactly the kind of role model their son needed. And that plan appeared to be working. Jody was winning tournaments, bringing home trophies, and seemed happier than he'd been in months. But while the Plauchés believed they had found someone they could trust, behind that friendly mentor facade, a sinister manipulation was taking place. For nearly a year, Jeffrey Doucet had been manipulating Jody behind the scenes. What began as a relationship built on trust gradually crossed every boundary. Doucet convinced Jody to keep what was happening a secret, leaving the 11-year-old confused, frightened, and unsure how to tell anyone. The boy, who once looked up to his instructor as a friend and mentor, didn't have the words to explain what he was experiencing. Around mid-February 1984, the situation escalated dramatically. Sources differ on the exact date, but around February 19th, Doucet arrived at the Plauché home and told the family he was taking Jody on a quick errand. Instead, he left Louisiana with the boy, traveling through Texas, before eventually reaching a motel near Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Along the way, Doucet altered Jody's appearance in an attempt to avoid being recognized, including dyeing his blonde hair black, hoping people would assume Jody was his son. For nearly 2 weeks, Jody was kept away from his family, while they endured every parent's worst nightmare. And Jody endured a nightmare himself. A nationwide search was underway, and with each passing day, Gary Plauché feared the outcome would only get worse. The break in the case came from the most unlikely source, Doucet himself. After about 10 days in captivity, he allowed Jody to make a collect call to his mother. That call was all the police needed. It was immediately traced to a motel in Anaheim, and on February 29th, 1984, police raided the room and found Jody alive. Doucet was arrested without a fight. Jody was returned to his family in Louisiana on March 1st. But the relief of his return was completely shattered by the horrifying truth of what he had endured. A medical examination confirmed Jody had experienced horrific abuse. When a friend of Gary's in the sheriff's office delivered the devastating news, Gary was consumed by a blinding rage. He felt he had failed to protect his son, and any faith he had in the justice system began to crumble as well. He reportedly told a friend he was going to kill the man who did this to his son. As the date for Doucet's extradition from California approached, Gary's anger hardened. The night of the extradition, he was at a local bar when a chance encounter with the TV executive from the local news station gave him one piece of information he needed. the exact time Doucet's flight would land. At around 9:30 p.m. on March 16, 1984, Gary Plauché arrived at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport. He was disguised in a baseball cap and sunglasses, blending right into the background. Tucked into his boot was a .38 caliber revolver. The news crew was there, ready to capture the arrival of the infamous kidnapper, and they were about to get a story that would stun the nation. As law enforcement escorted a handcuffed Jeffrey Doucet through the terminal, Gary stood by a bank of payphones, talking to a friend. His words were chillingly calm, as he reportedly said his target was coming and that his friend was about to hear a shot. He hung up the phone, stepped out from behind a pillar, and raised the gun. With the cameras rolling, Gary fired a single point-blank shot into the side of Doucet's head. The man who had destroyed his son's innocence crumbled to the ground. Chaos erupted. In the confusion, a deputy who knew Gary screamed, "Gary, why?" Gary's response was raw and immediate. "If somebody did it to your kid, you'd do it too." Doucet was rushed to the hospital but died the next morning. Gary Plauché, the grieving father, was now a killer, his active vengeance captured on film for the world to see. The question wasn't whether Gary had pulled the trigger. Millions had watched him do it. The question was what would happen to him next. Since the crime was caught on camera, it seemed like an open and shut case. I mean, your defense strategy is a little limited when half the country has already seen the evidence on the evening news. But public opinion was overwhelmingly on his side. Across the nation, people saw him not as a cold-blooded murderer, but as a father pushed to his absolute limit. This massive wave of public support, along with testimony about his extreme emotional distress, drastically changed his legal fate. His defense argued that the trauma of learning about his son's abuse had left him with a diminished capacity to know right from wrong. He ultimately pleaded no contest to the lesser charge of manslaughter. The judge, ruling that sending Plauché to prison would serve no real purpose, gave him a 7-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Gary Plauché never spent a single day in prison for the killing. While his father became a kind of folk hero, Jody's journey was much more complicated. He hadn't wanted Doucet dead, he just wanted the abuse to stop. The public execution of his abuser by his own father added another profound layer of trauma to his experience. And it actually created a rift between father and son for years. Over time, Gary and Jody did reconcile. Gary lived a quiet life until his death from a stroke in 2014 at the age of 68. Jody, in a remarkable display of strength, channeled his trauma into advocacy. He earned a college degree and has spent his life working in violence prevention and counseling victims. He eventually published a memoir titled Why Gary Why? To tell his side of the story, and he now works to educate parents and professionals on the tactics predators use. If this one stuck with you, put the video on your screen right now because it is actually even darker than this one. And make sure to click like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. That really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.